Alright guys, welcome back to Learnlyte, and in this video we're going to talk about tuples. So what are tuples? Tuples are similar to lists where a tuple is a sequence of values. So imagine a tuple as a large box that we can put any amount of values in, and the values can be of any type. Sounds just like a list, right? Well, the main difference between a tuple and a list is that lists are mutable, meaning we can change the values inside of a list, while a tuple is immutable, meaning we cannot change the values inside of a list once it has been created. So with that being said, let's take a look at how we can create a create a tuple in Python. Alright, so to create a tuple in Python, I'm going to bring open the shell right here. And we're going to create a tuple called t. So I'm going to say t equal. I'm going to use the parentheses operator to create a tuple. And inside of this, I'm going to have some elements such as a. Going to have b. I'm going to have one more called c. I hit enter. And if I call my variable t again, you can see we get a tuple with a, b, and c. Another way to create a tuple is that we can just have a sequence of characters separated by a comma. As in, I'm going to create another tuple called x, and I'm just going to have the value separated by a comma without using any parentheses. So I'm going to have, let's say, moon, the string moon followed by 12.5, followed by 3.147, followed by false. Go ahead and hit enter. If I call x again, you can see I created a tuples with moon, 12.5, 3.147, and false. So if you have basically some values separated by just comma without any parentheses, Python is going to basically assume you're creating a tuple. But I like to stick to this format right up here because it's more clear that you're creating a tuple versus just having this format right here. But I just wanted you to know that these two formats are both similar, as in they both create a tuple. But I like to use this one with the parentheses as it's more clear. Alright. So let's take a look at what we can do with tuples. And more specifically, we're going to talk about the slice operator with tuples. So as talked about before, I mentioned the slice operator in my list video, and I did a detailed explanation in my strings part 2 video. So if you need a refresher on the slice operator, I suggest you watch my strings part 2 video. And it's the same principle here. It's the same principle that works on strings, it works on lists, and it also works on tuples. So let's begin by creating another tuple called t. I'm going to basically reassign the values inside of the tuple. So in this tuple, I'm going to have a, I'm going to have b again, I'm going to have 1.65, and then I'm going to have true, and then I'm going to have 10. Go ahead and hit enter. If I call t again, you can see I now have a new tuple with these values. So let's say I want the element b. We know that b is at index 1. So if I want that element, I simply need to call t and then pass 1 inside of the square brackets. I go ahead and hit enter and I get b. Similar, if I want 1.65, I know that 1.65 is at index 2. So I simply call t and pass 2 because I want the element at index 2, which is 1.65. So let's say I want to basically do another string operation where I'm going to split the tuple into a subtuple. I can say t followed by, in this case I want 1:3 and square brackets. So we know how the slice operator works. In this case we begin at index 1, we go up to index 3 but don't include index 3. So we're not assuming, we're gonna get b and 1.65. We go ahead, we hit enter, and we get b and 1.65. And similarly, if we have t and we're gonna have from 2 colon, and we don't give it any ending value. What that means is we're gonna start at index 2, which is 1.65, and go up to the end of the tuple. So we're expecting to get 1.65 true and 10. Go ahead, hit enter, and we get exactly that. Alright, so we take a look at the slice operator as it regards to tuples. Let's take a look at how we traverse a tuple. And by now you're probably saying, well, we traverse a string using a for loop, we traverse a list using a for loop, so that means we're going to traverse a tuple using a for loop as well. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to create a function here, which I'm going to call traverse, yeah, and it accepts a tuple. And then what we're going to do, we're going to say for I in range, and we're going to have this, and instead of this we're going to have the len of the a tuple, like that. And for each element of the tuple, we're just going to print out the element. So we're going to print out a tuple, and then square brackets, we're going to have I. Go ahead, save, and we're going to run. And now we're going to call the function traverse. And we know traverse accepts a tuple. And we're going to create a tuple using the parentheses. And then inside of this tuple, I'm just going to have 1, 2, 3. I'm going to have a string called cat, another string called dog. Alright, go ahead and hit enter, and you can see it prints out each element of the tuple. We print out 1, 2, 3, cat, dog. So that's how we traverse a tuple using a for loop. So in previous examples when traversing, we did some modification to the elements inside, but you have to remember that for tuples we are immutable, meaning that we can't modify the elements of a tuple. The only way we can do that is once we create a tuple, the elements inside of it is going to stay the same. If we want to modify any elements within a tuple, we're going to have to create a new tuple with the elements modified, because tuple does not allow us to basically change the elements within it. We'll have to create a new tuple with the elements already updated or changed from the previous tuple. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at some operations that we can basically perform on a tuple. So right here, I'm just going to create some tuples. I'm going to create a tuple called T1, which is going to be equal to just some A, B, and C. So that's T1. Go ahead, hit enter. If I call T1, I get that. I'm going to create another tuple called T2, and this one, I'm going to have some other elements. I'm going to have D, E, and F. Alright, hit enter. If I call T2, I get that. So there are some operations we can do on a list. Well, on a tuple, I should say, we can add tuples. So we can say T1 plus T2, and we get both tuples combined. But you should be noted that, remember, tuples are immutable, so we can't change the elements of a tuple. So when we add two tuples together, what's actually happening behind the scenes is that we're creating a new tuple with the combined values of both tuples. So in essence, we now have 3 tuples. We have tuple 1, we have tuple 2, and we have this new tuple with the combined elements of tuple 1 and tuple 2. We can also perform the multiplication operation on tuples, so we can have T1 times 3, and we get a new tuple with the elements of tuple 1 being repeated 3 times. Alright, so that's one operation. That's another operation we can do with tuples. So we have one where we can combine 2 tuples, concatenation. We have one where we can basically create a new tuple with the elements being repeated any number of times by using the multiplication operation. Another operation that we can use on tuple, which is quite helpful, is the in operator. So we can say, for example, a element in T1, we get true. So this is basically saying if the element a in T1, similarly we can say 3 in T2 and we get false. So this is a great way to test if an element is present within a tuple. And those are some of the operations that we can do in a tuple. We can add tuples to create a new tuple with the combined elements. We can basically have the elements within a tuple being repeated by using the multiplication operation. But bear in mind, this doesn't alter the tuple. What it does is basically creates a new tuple with the elements being repeated that number of times. So this is not T1. This is a new tuple that was created behind the scenes because tuples are immutable. All right, and the last operator we looked at was the in operator, which basically is a operation that tells us is a given element within this tuple and then tells us true or false. So let's take a look at some helpful methods that we can basically use on tuples that will give us more insights. So another helpful method that we can use on tuple is the len method. So we can say len, and we pass a tuple instead of it. And basically what it gives us is the amount of elements within the tuple. So in this case, tuple 1 has 3 elements, so it gives us 3. You can also find len, and what we're going to have is T1 plus T2. So remember, this is going to create a new tuple with the list with the elements in T1 combined with the elements in T2. So we find the length of that, we're going to get 6. Because T1 has 3 elements, T2 has 3 elements, so the tuple with the combined elements is going to have 6 elements inside of them. Another useful one is the max function, but this only works when the tuples have numbers in them, or all numbers. So I'm going to create another tuple called T3. Inside of this tuple, I'm just going to have some numbers such as 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to create another one called T4, which is also just going to have some numbers such as 4, 5, and 6. Hit enter. So if I call T3, I get that, which is correct. If I call T4, I get that too, which is also correct. So if I say max, and I say T4, it's going to find the maximum number, which we know to be 6. And if I say max T3, it's going to find the maximum number, which we know to be 3. And similarly, we have another function called min, and you can pretty much guess what this one does. So if I pass T3 to it, it's going to give me the minimum value, which is 1. If I call min again and pass T4, it's going to give me the minimum value, which is 4. Alright, so those are some helpful things when it regards to tuple. So let's do a quick recap. I showed you how to create a tuple using the parentheses, such as right up here. You can also create a tuple by just having values separated by a comma, but as mentioned before, I prefer this method because it's more clear that you're creating a tuple here. We talked about the slice operator on tuples, how we can get specific elements within a tuple, and how we can basically get a subtuple using the slice operator. We talked about traversing a tuple, right, using a for loop, such as right here. And what we're doing in this case is just printing out the elements of a tuple, because remember, tuples are immutable. We can't modify or change the elements of a tuple. If we want to modify the elements, we basically have to create a new tuple with the modified elements. All right. And we talked about some operations that we can perform on tuples, such as adding 2 tuples together, which produces a new tuple with the combined elements. We can perform repetition, or have the elements of a tuple being repeated by using the multiplication operator. As mentioned, this creates a new tuple with the elements being repeated that many times. We have the in operator, which is very useful. It can tell us if a given element is within a tuple or not. And we take a look at some of the functions that we can use on tuples. We can use the len function on a tuple, which basically tells us how many elements are in a tuple. We have a max function, which works only on a tuple when it consists entirely of numbers, and it gives us the max value within that tuple. And we have the min function, which basically gives us the min value within a tuple. And there are many more functions that are many more methods that we can use on a tuple. You can do a quick Google search to find them all out. And there are also other operations that you can use in a tuple, but these are by far the most common. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this content, or if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed it, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more content. And once again, thank you for watching.